Welcome everyone to True Real Estate Horror Stories. My name is Mike McNamara. I'm your host. Our goal here is to educate the real estate industry from stories or experiences that we've had in our careers. And today I have the pleasure of having Josh Campa here. This is unique because typically I've had real estate agents that do buying and selling. Josh handles the entire rental market and property management. So I'm excited because I know I can learn a lot from this, but tell everybody about yourself, how long you've been in the industry, and yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Mike, for having me. I'm super excited to be here today. I've been in the industry for 17 years. Started in commercial property management when I was 16 years old. Got licensed as soon as I was 18. Started doing residential property management, a little bit of sales in there, but really honed in and focused on the property management portion. I just love the idea of creating processes and procedures and really mitigating liability for my clients to ensure that they're getting the most out of their investment. And so I kind of really started from the bottom, doing accounting, admin stuff, and worked my way on up. And
Awesome.
Now I'm still with the same firm. 17 years later, I'm a partner in that firm with Chris McGarry, and we're the McGarry Campa Group at Berkshire Hathaway.
Cool.
And I also have the honor of serving on the board of directors for Las Vegas Realtors, and was
that's
recently
where we've met. So,
yes, was recently elected to become the next president-elect. So
congratulations.
Yeah.
That's good. Awesome, man. So what do you got for us? Because I know there's a lot of craziness in the rental, in the property management industry.
Listen, property management gets a little bit wild. We are not the majority of the complaints at the real estate division for nothing. It gets a little crazy out there. But you know, I think if you do it right, you're able to solve a lot of those problems. But I know you want to hear about all the good stuff. So let me tell you a couple, situations that maybe I've been through that maybe the listeners out there might want to hear about. So we had one property, we manage a wide range of properties, so low end and high end. So I'm going to give you one on the high end, and then I'm going to give you one on the lower end. So on the higher end, we had this luxury property in Southern Highlands. Really nice, exclusive, guard-gated community. I'm not going to tell you which one. Yeah, keep the listeners guessing.
Yes,
but it was really nice property, and we approved a tenant to get in there. Great credit, good income. But we noticed she started paying all cash, and it was at the time we were accepting cash. We've since stopped doing that, but we were, and she was paying all cash, and everything was good. And then we started getting some phone calls maybe about 6 months into the lease. Neighbors saying that there's people coming in and out. There was a lot of foot traffic. They were a little bit concerned, and then we started kind of getting HOA violations, and those started coming in, photos of different cars and things like that, and it started getting more and more and more. So we would send her HOA violations constantly, and then slowly but surely her rental payments started getting later and later and later. And we started getting calls and reports that there was some sort of prostitution ring going on in the property. And so we have to have concrete documentation when there's some sort of crazy allegation like that, right? So
Legal
you can't
issues.
just be random person called and said that. So, but it definitely put us on high alert, what's going on. Slowly but surely, she stopped paying her rent completely. We began the eviction process, and it was lengthy because if tenants maybe talk to the right people, they can delay that process pretty heavily. They can answer every 7-day notice we put out, and unfortunately, sometimes our judicial system takes a little bit longer than we might like sometimes.
What does that process look like? What does the eviction
process
process
look like? Well, at the time it was a little bit different than it is now. And now, right now, you serve a 7-day notice, and then that's 7 business days. And depending on the jurisdiction, so like in Henderson, for example, their courts are closed on Friday. So
Gotcha.
they count the actual days they're open, so depending which one. And then after the 7-day notice, you can file an eviction against the tenant, and they'll have the opportunity throughout all of this time to be able to answer those and whatnot. And now they've implemented new things where we have to go to mediation if they petition for it and whatnot. Okay. So all of those things are in place. And then after that, The judge will hear the case and then either grant you the eviction or not. And usually that process honestly takes about, depending on the time of year, maybe 45 to 60 days.
Okay, so for investors or people that have properties, if they go through an eviction, just to understand, it could be a 45 to 60 day eviction period.
Yeah.
Okay. The risk of being in that situation, right?
Correct. So we went through that process, and in the middle of that, experienced delays after delays. And normally, if everything goes well, it's 45 to 60 days. But this was not going well. This was not going well. This was a 90-day situation, and it was in a guard-gated community, and so that presents another barrier, right? Because you have to post notices at a certain time. If you don't do it right, or if it's not filed with the courts correctly on a certain day, you might have to restart the whole process over. So if the guard doesn't let our processor in, or if the whatever the case may be, it doesn't work out, and the judge will deny your eviction. And so
if you have a bad property manager,
there you go. They don't know
what they're doing. That process could have been double.
It could have been double. So we're in the middle of that process. We go over barrier after barrier, and in the middle of all of that, the FBI and the SWAT team raid the house because now they've found out about this. So we get a call and we're like, whoa, this is crazy, right? Like, what's going on? They raid the property. They bust down the door. The property itself was completely destroyed inside because from the tenants and from the FBI, because the SWAT team, because they were in there. I mean, you're talking with guns. I mean, breaking down doors, going in there. I mean, there's drugs. There's all kinds of crazy
they're also
stuff.
Collecting evidence.
Yeah, they don't care about the property. They're not here to preserve it or do some sort of meticulous walkthrough. They're looking for evidence. They're looking for criminals, and they're trying to get a job done.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, that was a situation where we had an owner that was out a lot of money because, there was a tenant in there that was doing crazy illegal stuff. Unfortunately, there was no way to kind of screen that. That's the risk that you take when you become a landlord. And that's not every case, right? This is a very unique circumstance. There's maybe been a handful of FBI raids in my time in the industry, but
more than once.
More than once, but this one was by far probably the most.
Why doesn't insurance come into play for the homeowner in this type of a situation?
I mean, it really depends on the coverage that they have. So you want to make sure that if you are a landlord, that you have comprehensive coverage, and you make sure that it's landlord coverage. Because sometimes, the worst mistake that property owners will have, especially mom and pop landlords, they might rent out a property and never notify their insurance that it's become an investment property. So there's different packages that you can have. I've had landlords that have really great insurance. Well, they'll even cover loss of rent or if there's an eviction or something like that. But then I have other landlords that don't have the right insurance or maybe don't have those extra coverages that really go a long way in situations like this.
So tenant insurance, that's more for the tenant's belongings. And
correct, and that's super important to have too, because as a landlord, there will be situations that will come up where maybe a tenant will become displaced due to the habitability of the property. So making sure that they have those insurances as well is incredibly helpful.
Is that something you require for your tenants?
We do. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And another, that's the high end. On the low end, it gets pretty wild out there too. I had an apartment complex, about a 15-unit complex, and it was in a downtown area, and so there was a lot of traffic, a lot of foot traffic, people coming in and out, and the rent was probably at the time it was like $600 a month, and so it got pretty wild out there. They would have parties pretty frequently, and it was really difficult to kind of, navigate. And this is pretty early on in my career, so I was still learning a lot. But this whole experience taught me so much. But the tenants themselves began to kind of create factions with each other because the units were fairly small. So it was a very intimate living situation.
Well, only 15 units. That's a pretty smaller building.
Correct. So they all began to kind of have friendships and relationships and things like that. And they're throwing these parties in the courtyard area. And there was a lot of homeless population as well. So I would often get calls that people would go into the laundry room and they were, shooting up heroin or something of that nature. And so there was a lot of crazy stuff like that happening. But there was this one moment, and I did my best to, notify them. There was a lot of Spanish speakers, so it was a little bit of a language barrier sometimes. And I speak some Spanish, but I mean, listen, it's tough when that's their primary language and yours is a little bit different. So, so anyways, I had sent them notices constantly about stuff that they were doing, but this time one of their parties got really out of control. One of the wives in one unit was sleeping with someone else's husband. The two wives, they start fighting, and it's brutal, man. I mean, I obviously wasn't there, but what would happen is they would have these situations, and then they would come to my office, and they would want me to sort of like act as the mediator for it. And so this happened, and so this lady comes in, and she brings her younger daughter because she wants a translator. And she's like blood, like hair. It's just crazy.
The younger daughter, or
the lady, yeah. And it's like she just went through some kind of war, and so now she's telling me about all this, and I'm like, man, I did not sign up to be a marriage counselor, a referee. I mean, I feel like I should be in a UFC ring right now. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so I have one come in, the next one comes in after. Eventually, we had to get rid of those tenants because it just was not working out very well. But
do you have an obligation to report anything? Like if there's, a teacher would have an obligation to report a kid being abused. Do property managers have any obligations or?
Not necessarily. If there was some sort of domestic thing like that, I would definitely refer them to the police department. Because I wasn't a witness of it. It's really hard for me to just go by hearsay, and I wasn't trying to be.
You have to be careful.
Exactly. You have to be very careful and meticulous. But if I had concrete evidence, like let's say the HOA called me and they gave me written documentation that the tenant was having criminal activity, that's a different scenario where we would absolutely, have to report them. But if it's something where someone's just telling me something, until I have something concrete where I have evidence, it's really difficult, and you have to be very particular that you're not overstepping your bounds either.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So for anybody that is looking to get into property management specifically,
if they still want to.
If they still want to after this.
If you guys are still interested.
What is, your top 3 things that you would advise them to start with? Is it to join a team? Is it to, what would be those really important things that they would need to?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, you have to decide if this is something you really want to do. And I think the best way to do that is find somebody that will, maybe you can shadow them, like you said, maybe join a team, or even just work for a property management company. I know a lot of agents out there, something I've recommended and something that we'll do is we'll bring someone in and have them do a component of property management, like let's say accounting or maintenance coordination or just the leasing side of it.
Right.
That way they learn one function, and then you kind of slowly start to learn every little piece, because all of those pieces kind of create the service that we call property management. So and I think if you're able to go through all of those things and still want to do it or really understand or feel passionate about it, then you can start your own portfolio, you can start really managing property on your own. But I would say understanding the whole process from start
before
to
just
finish.
Jumping into it.
Before just jumping into it and saying, I want to be a property manager, because I've seen so many agents over the years do that, and usually what happens when they just jump right in is they end up managing 1 to 5 properties, and then they want to blow their brains out and they throw in the towel. They're like, no, take these properties, I never want to do any property management again. But if you slowly build, then I think
you get your systems together, you learn the process. You also keep yourself out of the division and getting in trouble.
1,000,000%. And I really feel like that's why I was able to have a sustainable career in the property management industry, because I started, doing admin stuff. I started doing maintenance, and then I did accounting, and then really just kind of built my knowledge and expertise in that area.
Yeah, that was the same with me. I started as a personal assistant, then I went from that to a buyer's agent, listing agent, then branched off, did my own thing for a little bit, and then came back together and built a team. So it's that process that just taught me all the different areas of real estate.
1,000,000%. And stay educated, stay up to date. The rules and regulations in property management are constantly changing. This last year legislatively, we had numerous proposals and bills that were introduced that would kind of just change the way that we do business. And over the years it has. I mean, when I first got into it, the eviction process was completely different. The amount we can charge for late fees was unlimited. Everything was different. And so they've slowly kind of changed the dynamics. So, late fees are capped at 5%. You have to have a grace period for a tenant of a minimum of 3 days. The 5-day turned into a 7-day, and now they've put a mediation process in there to kind of create a little bit more barrier and a little bit more of a process so that the tenants have an opportunity to get help if they need to. So
especially probably lower income as well.
Yeah. So
an opportunity.
Being able to understand those things and educate your investors out there who don't know the regulations in your jurisdiction is incredibly important, and a big piece of being a property manager.
What are your thoughts around the application fee? That is, I understand the application fee because I understand you're having to pull credit. The company's spending some money when they're vetting these people, but then I've also heard the horror stories of them just collecting 15 applications, collecting all of the application fees, and nobody getting calls back and things like that. And a lot of people that are looking for rentals, especially on the lower income, they're having to get into multiple properties to try to do this, and so they're always spending the $70 and $70 or whatever that fee is.
Yeah, I think there's two sides of every story, right?
Sure.
So I think with an application fee, like you said, there's always going to be a hard cost, which is pulling the credit, background, criminal history, whatever the case may be, and then there's the time that goes into it. So let's say you have a $75 application fee, your hard cost is $45, and then you have $30 of the time that you put into screening the applicant, which means verifying the employment, verifying the rental history.
And if you don't do that, you're paying an employee to do that too.
Exactly, right. So that's time and that's money out of your pocket. So $75 sounds like a lot to start, but then when you kind of start breaking it down, you're like, okay, wait, how many hours is that going to take? And you're going to pay that much. So maybe you might even either be making $5 to $10 or losing money off of every application, depending. And so there's that perspective, and then there's a perspective of the tenant where they are looking for a home and availability might be low and they need to get into something, and they've put in application after application, and now they've spent $1,000 on applications because they're trying to get into something. And so what I would say is that the process needs to be better. It needs to be better for the consumer because it's not working right now. I think we can put processes and procedures into place that maybe require that you screen one application at a time, or have maybe a cap on how much you can charge, or something of that sort. I think there's a medium that you can find.
I agree.
But I think you have to have the right voices and the right perspectives in the room to be able to find a common ground and commonality.
Yeah. So if you have an agent that is dealing with renters and they call you, is there certain questions that they should ask to protect their client, to protect themselves when they're talking to you, asking about a property for a renter of their client of theirs?
Absolutely. Number one, what are the move-in costs? Number two, what are your application screening requirements? So is there a credit score you're looking for? Is there a rental history that you're looking for? That way you're able to communicate to the renter and say, hey, do you meet these requirements before we get into you putting out money for the property? And sometimes answering those questions in advance will alleviate them having to waste money on an application fee for a rental. Exactly. Another good question that a lot of people overlook is if you're approved for the application, how long will you hold the property? So sometimes, someone will apply for a property and they'll be like, well, we don't want to move in for 2 months. Well, I mean, the owner's not going to want to hold it for 2 months. You may be a qualified applicant, but,
Is the average like 2 weeks that they'll hold it?
Yeah, I would say 2 weeks. I've always gone by 30 days, which is on the more liberal side. Yeah. But some people, it's like 2 weeks is, as much as they'll do. So being able to communicate that to the renter so that they understand, and all the fees that are associated with moving in, there could be a a pet fee, there could be a pet deposit, and being able to let them know so that they're ready when they're going to sign their contract. They're not surprised.
They're not shocked by these other fees.
Exactly.
And had a certain amount of money planned for it.
Exactly. And it's pretty easy, especially if you're an agent out there showing a property on the MLS. Everything should be broken down in there. But even just following up one more time just to make sure with the agent is never a bad idea.
Cool. Love it. All right. Last question.
Sure.
Do you have a favorite book that you would recommend to somebody? It doesn't have to be real estate related. It can be any book.
Okay. So a book that I love that has always kind of probably resonated with me because I'm really big on communicating and understanding the way people communicate with each other. And so The 5 Love Languages was a book for me that really, really put into perspective the way people give and receive love and communicate with each other. And I think once you identify that with someone, you can really, really hone in on that relationship and build on it. And I think when I was younger and not really knowing that and kind of navigating, it was a little challenging and sort of opened my mind up. So I always encourage people to read that book.
I think it's a good one.
Yeah, because I think it really, really helps your relationships, not just, your romantic ones, but your business relationships, your friendships.
And me and my wife read it, and we figured out that my love language, and then we figured out hers is all 4 of them. So
oh, wow.
All 5 of them, yeah.
She's like, I'm going to need you to do all of those.
So we're still working on that, but no.
Yeah.
Well, hey, man, I really appreciate your time, you coming by here. I know you're very busy, so thank you very much.
Awesome.
And I'd love to have you on again.
Thanks, I appreciate you.
Anything comes up, you let me know.
All right, will do.
Thank you.
All right.